We're just about to get started, so if you could move into the forum. All right. So as the third day of our conference is drawing to a close, it's my pleasure to introduce our second and last plenary speaker, Adam Strom. Adam is the Executive Director of Reimagining Migration, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to advance the education and well-being of immigrant-origin youth, decrease bias and hatred against young people of diverse origins, and help rising generations develop the understanding and habits of heart and mind that are necessary to build and sustain welcoming and inclusive communities. Before helping to found Reimagining Migration, Adam was a longtime member of the senior leadership team of Facing History and Ourselves, where he led the content development team. The educational resources developed under his direction have been used in tens of thousands of classrooms and experienced by millions of students worldwide, including numerous resource books, study guides, and films on identity, immigration, and prejudice. In his talk entitled Reimagining Belonging in an Age of Migration, Adam will offer us a vision where all students learn from each other, appreciate diversity, understand migration's role, and are prepared to address inequities. A vision which is essential for a thriving society in an era of unprecedented demographic change. Adam, welcome.
Thank you. That's a lovely bio, whoever that guy is. Now, first of all, I'm really honored to be here. It's a strange and auspicious honor to be the last speaker of a conference, right? I don't think I've been, I've been the last up at a baseball game, which was an insult. So I don't know where it means to be the last person at a conference. I hope it's a good thing. I'm feeling energetic this afternoon, and so I hope that we can have an energetic conversation. I'm going to try to break a few rules, because if I don't break a few rules, then I haven't succeeded. So let me give you a little bit of a background. First of all, I just need to say something. Before I go any further, the reason I'm here is because of Larissa. So Larissa mentioned Facing History and Ourselves. I met Larissa 20 years ago. She's one of the most inspiring, smart, powerful people that you will ever meet. And so one of the things I think about in all of this work is the importance of relationships. So I'm hoping that this is the beginning of relationships among you and maybe with y'all too. It really, really, really matters. So people have talked a little bit about positionality. I'm not going to do a whole lot on that, but I do think it's useful here for a second. So why in the world would Adam Strom, this white guy from Boston, Massachusetts, be so on fire, actually, about issues of migration? And we can all find our own lineages about why we want to tell that story. I was just looking, 𝗍𝘗𝗄 Wasserstrom, my fourth great-grandfather came to this, fourth grandfather, or whatever, I'll get that lineage right someday, came to the country on 12/12/12, December 12th, 1912, into Galveston, Texas. So you could say, okay, I care that way, but it's actually not true. I come at this subject because I'm terrified for the fate of democracies around the world right now. I've been in education for about 30 years. I have never seen a moment where I feel that democracy is as fragile as it is. And what we know, and people don't, the elephant in the room is that migration is driving xenophobia all around the world. And it's not immigrants' fault. It's people like me. It's like the folks who've been in the dominant communities. Those folks, me, we're the problem. And so often the conversation has slipped the other way. So positionality, I'm speaking from a perspective of the problem. And now I'll smile and try to be happy, but I think it's important to recognize that we approach this in a flipped way often. So in a world increasingly shaped by migration, this is the headline, right? This is, maybe you pay attention to this and nothing else. In a world increasingly shaped by migration and demographic diversification, immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, migrants of all kind are really foundational to our shared future. We know that in Western Europe, that without migrant labor, there are not enough people to do the jobs. We know that's true in the United States. We know that's been true in the UK. The UK, I can't decide if it wants to be part of Europe, so that's why I kept them separately in that conversation. But this is an ongoing conversation. Without immigrants, without migrants, our economies will be in terrible shape. That may not be the most important reason to care, but it's a reason that usually people pay attention to. So I'll start that way. But there's another story here, though, that despite folks needing migration, the backlash to migration is huge. It's big. I'm going to talk about it in a little bit more depth in a minute. So our education systems have a really, really important role, because it means that we have to prepare people for a world that people may not be sure that they want right now, right? And so I would argue that structurally, we have thought about migration and education entirely wrong, and I'd like to flip it on its head. So building, as you guys know, the answer to everything is building an intercultural competence, right? So the answer is that, and I'll explain again what I mean. So here's the bad news, right? So the status quo of migration in our schools is not aligned with the needs of migration. And what do I mean? I mean that there is a misunderstanding of who immigrant kids are. There's a misunderstanding of the way that what their peers need to know about issues of migration. Again, I'll go into depth in a bit. There's a misalignment of the way teachers and school faculty are educated around these issues. There's a misalignment between the way that our communities respond to newcomers, our countries respond to newcomers, and the way we are globally thinking about these issues. We think about these issues in little boxes, and without understanding that all of our identities are porous. Again, I think Larissa began to talk about a shift there. So instead of me babbling on, which I'll do plenty of, I thought maybe we should listen to this young woman. This is a woman named 𝘍𝗫𝙫. She goes to high school in Lowell, Massachusetts. Lowell is a town with a long history of immigrants. It was actually where a lot of our shoes used to come from, Lowell, Massachusetts. And it was Irish laborers who used to build the shoes. 𝘍𝗫𝙫 is an Iraqi refugee. So I want you to listen to 𝘍𝗫𝙫. I also want you to know that she has been in the country 2 years when she recorded this. So when you listen to her English, if you hear an accent, I want you to admire. I want admiration of 2 years of English. No, it doesn't want me to do that. Come back, 𝘍𝗫𝙫. And I'm sharing this because I know her teacher. No, more reasons than that.
An Iraqi heart in America. My parents were so worried sending us to school every day because of the war. I was born in Baghdad in Iraq. Baghdad is a beautiful city with a lot of history, but also a lot of conflicts. I was 2 years old when America started a war in my country. I was 5 when the Civil War started. Every day on our way to school, we were worried about getting kidnapped or killed. I used to hear about so many people who got kidnapped and killed. I was depressed. I cried easily and I was scared. I did not want to leave my house or go to school. When I was at school, I used to hear gunshots every day during class. Even outside of school, sitting outside of my house, I would hear them. Every day, we would walk past guards in front of our school who would hold guns to protect us. When I would be sitting in my room, I expected any minute an explosion could happen, and indeed it did happen once when I was 7. I remember I was in my room and suddenly an explosion happened nearby. All the window glass shattered. It was terrible to live under these war conditions. Iraq was safer in the 1970s and before. Iraq once had a really great civilization. Iraq was the first country that invented writing. We have had famous mathematicians like Ibn al-Haytham and al-Kindi, who is a philosopher. When I was little, I used to love visiting the Baghdadi Museum to learn about our history. There were wax statues that dressed up like how Iraqi used to live, and rooms that looked like how people lived in the old days. I loved learning about Iraqi history. But when I was 13, my family had the opportunity to move to the United States. It was unsafe in my country. When I arrived here, I was surprised by everything. The language, the people, and the culture. Everything was different. Schools in the United States are very different than in Iraq. They are much larger, with many classrooms. Some things were the same. I saw security guards at my school, but without guns. But like Iraq, in my school, there were police officers with guns that were there to protect us. And here too, schools get attacked. What surprised me the most was the view of some Americans about Iraq. I learned that some people thought that my country is only a place that is destroyed and that there was no beauty. I wish people could see the many beautiful cities, to explore the history and the museums, and to learn about the many diverse people that live there. I wish it was safe enough for people to travel there. It hurts me to see what is happening now in Iraq. Even as I have made a new home here, I still miss everything in Iraq. I miss the rest of my family and friends. I miss the food and the spring weather. I miss the museums. All my memories and emotions are there. I cannot forget the fun that I had there. I still remember how we celebrated our holidays together every year with our family.
She goes on, but I'm ending there on purpose. So chaos point number 1. I want to ask you, and I want you to shout out at me, why does her story matter to you? Why does Arija's story matter to you? Humanity. Stereotypes. I'm sorry? Ignorance. I'm sorry, complexity, did I hear? Trauma. Empathy. She's a real person. Why does this matter to your community, however you decide to define that? Yeah, so she's made this interesting analysis about school security, right? This woman's got some interesting things for us to say and pay attention to. Can you all hear her, right? So our ignorance about Iraq and Middle Eastern civilization? Absolutely. Oh yeah, don't you? I'm a history geek, and I'm like, I want to hang out with her and talk about Iraqi history, which of course she knows so much more about than I ever would, and so I'd learn from her, right? Yeah. Yeah, so for a community, right, she appreciates the past. And so why does this story matter to the world? Yeah, so this is a story that we don't get shared with very often, unless you're in her school, right?
Migration is usually talked about in masses, with water metaphors, and this, we often then forget that it's comprised of individuals with individual stories like hers.
Yeah, takes this unbelievable global phenomenon and brings us down to an individual level. So I want you to think about her story as we go through this. But I'll tell you, so Reimagining Migration started as a project at UCLA, but became a nonprofit in 2020. It was a really good time to be a nonprofit, really good time to fundraise, let me tell you. I'm kidding. But since that time, we've been really in conversation with teachers and students. And I just want to share some of what we've been hearing. So what we've been hearing is a real sense of dislocation among all youth, immigrant kids and their peers, in response to the ways that their community's changing. We hear a lot of frustration from immigrant origin youth feeling that they're receiving unequal educational opportunities. This one Brazilian girl I know, this is actually a quote from a few years before I started this work. She said to me, you know, in Brazil I was studying Hannah Arendt. She said, here I am in the US high school and they're giving me Jack and Jill books, right? She's frustrated. I am smart. All they care about is my accent, right? Heightened polarization, right? And where's that polarization coming from? This is important, educators. Increasing diversity without any real contact, right? So people know that things are becoming more diverse, but we're not actually having a chance to interact. That's your job, right? This is what you guys do. And then there's the noise of xenophobia, right? Left and right. A presidential candidate from a major political party in the United States announced that he's planning to create detention camps for migrants if he gets elected. I've done genocide studies for a very long time. Words like detention camps scare me to death. So on top of that, we have poorly informed civic and policy debates about migration that are really exacerbated by a lack of understanding of the past. We actually don't know very much about our own history. We have myths that get in the way of our understanding of these issues. And then bottom line is that immigrant origin kids really are not valued, even by their teachers who may like them, because teachers don't recognize the strengths that they bring into the classroom. People hear accents, they read accents as saying that this kid isn't very smart. I don't know how many of you have ever felt judged by the way you speak, but you hear it again and again and again. We have work to do. So now backing up, I want to tell you that this is really important because migration is, you know, Larissa did a good job explaining how often we teach about war and how war shows up everywhere in what we talk about. Migration is actually the through line of human history. This is actually the story of who we are, how we got here. Instead, we teach about war. Larissa was saying we know Bosnia from 1992. I actually could tell you I know Bosnia from 2 wars. I know Sarajevo from World War I, and I remember the war in 92. Do I know very much? Thank God I know Larissa, because otherwise that would be all I know about Bosnia. So this through line of human history is not war. It's migration, and we need to reclaim it. So like, what did human beings do when we first stood up? When we first stood up, we moved. We have records of this in the footprints everywhere. It's imprinted in our genes. Literally, we can have people do our genetic records and we can tell you where we're from. I'm an American Eastern European Jew. Turns out my father did his DNA and they had looked into it. Turns out we spent a ton of time in the Punjab, right? So there's deep histories of human migration that are written into our genes, all of our genes. All of you have migration stories that you can find. So it's our art, Jacob Lawrence, it's our literature, it's the stories of religion, Like migration is central to the way that we understand ourselves as a world, and yet we have these unbelievably ill-informed political conversations about these issues. There is no single story of migration. Despite what everybody wants to tell you, the story is the border. The border is part of a story, but the larger story is a story of human movement that doesn't play out the same. It looks different in different places, in different time periods, but all regions of the world have migration stories as either receivers of migrants or places where migrants have left or doing both at the same time. But myths and misinformation about migration get in the way of us actually accessing the knowledge that we need to respond to the civic issues that come out in response to migration today. Educators, this is our job. Like this is our job. We have to pay attention. So about 40% of Americans, the image on the left is Ellis Island. About 40% of American families went through Ellis Island. I will tell you that there's no way to measure this, but I will say, and hypothetically, I will tell you about 80% of teaching about immigration is through the stories of Ellis Island. That becomes the single story of American migration. Ellis Island really only was an active place in immigration in the United States from 1892 to really World War I. I mean, it closes in 24 and gets a new purpose after that, but that's ridiculous. There's a much larger story. The image to the right is probably more representative, which is Angel Island. Has anybody from the United States ever heard of Angel Island? If you have, raise your hand. That's fabulous. Is that already a higher percentage than most places? Angel Island was built to keep Chinese immigrants out of this country. The Chinese Exclusion Act is built passed in 1882. It's built in 1910. It's literally a detention center in the middle of San Francisco Harbor. But people pass it because instead of going to Angel Island and learn that history, people instead go to Alcatraz. I recommend you go to Angel Island because that's where you're going to find the beginning of Chinese American literature, literally inscribed on the walls of Angel Island, poems by folks who were detained, among my favorite sources to teach with. So what gets in the way? So I'm sorry, I will tell you, half of this talk is presenting a problem, the other half is we're going to start to get to schools. But among the things that get in the way is language. So these folks are a picture of people from the Mayflower. Who are they? Are they immigrants? No, they're colonists, right? But a colonist isn't an immigrant, or is it? Or are they a migrant, right? So that becomes a separate category of a human being. Right? That's one way, but we don't want to talk about these colonists, by the way, who may have been literally where we're standing, Spanish settlers, right? So it's a language problem, but erasure becomes a problem too, right? What was the first European language spoken in the United States? Spanish. What's the oldest city in the United States? St. Petersburg, Florida, which was a Spanish colony. I'm from Boston. We love to tell the story of Plymouth and the Puritans. Guess what? We were late to the game. And then there are people who, language is a real problem. Then there are people who like to say that this is a story of an immigrant ship, right? There are political candidates who talk about enslaved Africans as immigrants. They were migrants, but they sure weren't immigrants. Immigrant means you're leaving from one place to another place by choice. These folks weren't leaving by choice. The differences in these migration experiences tell us a lot about equity, right? As does the Chinese Exclusion Act. Or what about what happens to the native population when migrants leave? That's a story in the United States. That's a story in the Middle East. That's stories in other parts of the world too. How do we think about that interplay between those who come and those who were here before? And language gets in the way again here. So these are people who are moving because of climate change. Some people might call them refugees, but not the United Nations, because there is no such thing as a climate refugee. Well, what do we do now? When we know climate change is going to become one of the biggest drivers of migration, not by choice, and yet the international language fails. So therefore our civic imagination fails because our language fails because we don't teach. So let's think about what's unique about this moment for a second. I hate reading to you, but I think the quote is useful, so I'm going to read to you. This is from the International Institute of Migration. It came out like a week ago. Migration is and has been for centuries a cornerstone of development, prosperity, and progress for many people. The present estimated 281 million international migrants globally represent around 3.6% of the world's population, but are estimated to generate 9.4% of the global GDP. Now, you talk about folks who are outperforming economically, you talk about folks who are central to the world. Migration drives progress, often painfully, often complicated, but this is part of the human story. And then there's no single story of why people move. You can all think about your own stories that you've learned. The scholar who I've done a lot of work with, Marcelo Suarez Orozco, says people leave ultimately for two reasons. They leave for love or they leave for war. I would say it's a little more complicated than that, but think about all the ways we express love. We express love for our children and the hopes that we're creating a new future. War may be a little too reductive. Again, climate change. But these stories are really foundational to the human experience. So migration is driven by what's going on in the world, right? So conflict, climate change, environmental degradation, development means that this year there's going to be about 300 million people around the world who are going to need humanitarian assistance as they migrate. And that means that they are part of 71.1 internally displaced people globally. So that's not even crossing national borders, which are not actually all that old, our national borders. That's lecture number 2. But that's the highest number ever recorded. The number of displaced people globally are at the highest that they've ever been. Now, numbers are complicated because populations have gone up. So like the United States, we're at about 14% of our country are immigrants. That's not the highest it's ever been before. At the late part of the 19th century, it was about 15%. So we're close, but that's not what you hear in a public conversation. So what do? We live off, the headlines that we have never really been corrected by. Just because this is, I think, important. Sometimes we think, if you pass an international law, that'll change things. So you see the blue, that's the number of refugees the United States has promised to take in a particular year. You see the orange, that's the number of people we take in. Look at last year. What do you see? This huge gap. And a huge gap. And that gap is often about fears of integration. So migration is changing the demographics of the world dramatically. I don't know how you feel about that, but I will tell you that it is driving a lot of people crazy. People talk about economic fear as being the driver of anti-immigrant prejudice. The scholarship has gotten clearer and clearer that fear of cultural change is really at the root of much of anti-immigrant prejudice. So just so you know, the chart that I'm using really is an illustration. On the far left, it's 1960, and those are the regions in which immigrants are coming to the US from. So the purple in there is Europe, the red is Asia, the green is the Americas. And now you look on the far right, there's a new color that's been added, which is Africa. So you'll see that the number of people, and this is what a lot of people get wrong, the number of people coming from the Americas to the United States by percentage is shrinking, actually. The number of people coming from Asia is growing. The number of people from Africa is growing. So it's interesting as we start to think about the relationship between our perceptions. But migration is driving demographic change, and driving demographic change in places that often didn't have newcomers previously. So it is leading to a backlash. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. So there's a woman named Suzette Brooks Masters. She studied how democracies manage integration. And what she says, I think it's very clear. Growing racial and ethnic diversity resulting from decades of immigration has been met with increased cultural anxiety. Now I want to say something that I think a lot of people missed in the news. So if I say January 6th, people know what I'm talking about. The January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. The people who stormed the US Capitol weren't poor, unemployed, red staters. This is not me, it's a guy from the University of Chicago. Many were middle-class professionals motivated by the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, which I'll explain in a minute. The key to characteristic uniting those arrested for their actions is that they came from counties where the share of the white population is declining the fastest. What do you think is going on, y'all? What's going on? Fear. The argument here is really important. This is not an economic argument. This is questions of culture. You all do intercultural competence. I just want to be clear, you're following the line I'm sharing. This is a piece of art by Banksy, which I really like a lot. So there is a through line of migration, there is a through line of anti-immigrant hate. I love this political cartoon from the 1890s. Folks, pushing away the newcomer, but their shadows behind them are of themselves as of immigrants in the previous generation. But this pattern has existed across history. So fortunately, people are taking this quite seriously now. So in the mid-2000s, Robert Putnam did a study, and he talked about communities turtling in, which is why I have a turtle there. What he means is how a turtle retreats its head. He said people turtle in response to immigration. I like his words here, so I'll read them. It turns out we all seem to be a little defensive, and to pull in, as I say, to hunker down. We have fewer friends. The only two things that go up is the diversity of our census tract goes up, our protest marches, and television watching. So this means less opportunity for interaction. If we turtle in, we don't know each other. We know that contact reduces prejudice. Schools have a role here. So there's a couple people working on theories about why people respond the way they do. I've been following the work of a woman at Yale named Jennifer Richardson, and I think this is kind of interesting. She's thinking about 5 factors that kind of float around the way that people think about these issues. What are the stereotypes in society and the media? What's the number of newcomers? What's the size of the community? What are the economic conditions? And what's the geographic proximity between where the newcomers live and everybody else lives? Somebody else, a guy named Ryan Enos at Harvard, simplifies it a little bit. His whole thing is social geography. And I think this is really important. When there is segregation, but relative proximity. So there may be segregation, but people aren't too far away in a diversifying community, that leads to increases in prejudice. The untapped lever in this is schools, because schools are supposed to be the public meeting space. Instead, schools have tracks. You have your newcomers go there, and you have everybody else goes there, and the expression I was raised with is never the twain shall meet. So you have these parallel experiences. And then because of that, misperceptions are really hard to disrupt. They did this, folks at Harvard did a global study, and they said kind of globally, around the world, people think 3 things. They think that immigrants are culturally more different than the dominant population than they really are. They think that they are poorer than they really are, and therefore more reliant on government money, if government money really existed. If anyone has done any work on refugee integration, you would know how little money refugees get as they try to integrate into the United States. And then they always overestimate the number and the percentage of immigrants in the country. Americans thought the country's about 35% immigrant. I told you it's 14%. So just think about that disparity. So I promised I'd share what the Great Replacement is. This is a bad thing. The Great Replacement is really popular. I mean it. There are people in Congress who absolutely believe this right now. The Great Replacement, the idea that there are people who are elites, often people's fantasies that Jewish elites are doing it, because this is a white supremacist fantasy. So the belief is Jewish elites are bringing people of color. I don't know if you remember the shooting at the Pittsburgh synagogue. The shooting at the Pittsburgh synagogue was because that synagogue was doing refugee work and working with Islamic refugee communities. So it was everything that they hated, right? You took a little Islamophobia, you took a little anti-Semitism, and believed that this was all being manipulated to change the composition of the United States. So how do you counter this? So this is where I want to look at the world through a young person's eyes. So anybody do ed school and know Urie Bronfenbrenner? Urie Bronfenbrenner came up with this idea of the ecology of learning, right? Larissa's talk this morning makes me hate this image though, because he's created a target and I have recreated his target. So Larissa, you can help me come up with a better image for the next time I talk about this, even though this was his idea. But if you think about people's identities and their opportunities in life, he used different words that I thought were a little too academic. I speak pedestrian English. So I think about this. I think all people are growing up in a world of migration and demographic change. And what are the factors that are going to influence people's opportunities as they navigate this world? And I'd say that there are a couple categories: who they are individually, their age, their gender, their race, ethnicity, nationality, culture, and religion. So in an American sense, we would stop there because we can know everything about somebody by their identity often. It's often the stereotypical belief. But let me tell you something. I take a 12-year-old who's born in Iraq, Arij, and put her in Lowell, Massachusetts. Her life opportunities are not going to be the same because the world that surrounds her starts to impact her choices and opportunities. So think about, how does the immediate neighborhood, her school, her neighborhood, create the conditions that are going to allow her to thrive? How do the broader social context, what's going on in the media, the political discourse, her own family's legal status, right, as they're trying to navigate through that world, how does that start to impact her world? As educators, you'd be saying, I'm supposed to focus on grades. I think what we're trying to do is educate people to thrive in a world of migration and change. And how does the deep historical context of the community influence people's opportunity? These are all things that we can tap as educators to use to help create an opportunity for young people to learn and live and thrive together. So the percentage of immigrant kids in schools it's actually more than doubled since 1990 in the United States. This is true in Western Europe too. I cannot do global numbers, but I can give you Western Europe in the US. But most immigrant origin youth, and as the children of immigrants, are not immigrants themselves. Most of them are, their parents are immigrants. 90% of immigrant origin youth were born in the United States. That means that they're actually citizens, right? How we approach them educationally, how we think about the outcomes that we're searching for in a classroom, you're educating citizens. These are newcomers who have rights, full rights in the United States. So of those, 4.5 million of those citizens live with one or more undocumented parents, or in families that are a mixed status. All right, so think about, how does that uncertainty start to impact a child's life? So what impacts the opportunities for young people to succeed? Their parents' immigration status and the stresses in their lives, the strength of their ties to the communities, right? Somebody was talking about this earlier, about the importance of this back and forth. The context of reception, in other words, are these places, is this a politically safe environment in which they're coming into? Is it an environment that has economic opportunities for people to succeed? And what's the contact look like with the dominant culture, right? Are these people being treated well? Are people being isolated? I could say a lot about immigration enforcement. What I want to say instead, short, is that immigration enforcement, a lot of immigration enforcement, active immigration enforcement, impacts negatively immigrant kids and those perceived as immigrants quite dramatically, with lower test scores, more kids not showing up in school, more absenteeism, declines in academic achievement. There's even reduced enrollment in schools in early childhood programs, and actually lower feelings in the school climate by all students, not just immigrant kids. Now you'd say, but wait a minute, that's the law. But think about the impact of the law on children's lives. Because as educators, those are the kids in our charge. So what about the dominant culture kids, the Adam Stroms of the world? What's shaping the way I think about immigrants? We used to think that there was a difference in age, right? Like younger people would be less bigoted. The last 10 years have really thrown that one out. So it's not true. It's not true. You see rising numbers of young people globally attracted to far-right extremes. Instead, what seems to happen, bigger factors are relationships to parents and peers. Young people are really being actively recruited by anti-immigrant white supremacist groups. Actually, anti-immigrant language is often the gateway to broader white nationalism, because there's more support for anti-immigrant attitudes than there is for overt white nationalism, so it's a way in. We've seen this in Europe, we've seen this in the United States. Hostile social political environments start to impact what life is like in school, right? And you start to see that teachers sometimes take on an attitude and kids follow the teachers. We know that kids who are growing up around the same time in the same political environment seem to be shaped by kind of those same factors, right? So it's not age, it's what's going on in our communities. So in these times of polarization, we need to figure out how to disrupt some of this polarization, because otherwise you're gonna have a generation that's raised breathing in this toxic polarization. Are you all with me so far? So the quality of contact that young people have with their peers who are not immigrants matters tremendously. So now here's my call to action. And this is really to you guys. Like I'm here because I want y'all to do the work, I'm lazy. No, it's really because I think the only way we're gonna tackle this is all together. So our communities will benefit from the opportunities that migration brings, that economic story, the social story, the cultural story. Who would say that the quality of American food has not gotten better because of immigration? Our music has changed and gotten better over the years because of immigration. Literally, the visual arts in this country. I was at the Museum of Fine Arts 2 weeks ago. I went through the 20th and 21st century collection of art. I would say well over 50% of the pieces in that 20th century and 21st century collection were by immigrants or the children of immigrants. These are the cultural producers for the United States. It is what scares people, but it's also true. So we have a choice, right? Are we going to create an environment where these kids are going to thrive? Or are we going to do something that is going to threaten the future of our democracy? I say that totally seriously. I often, people think I smile a lot, so I'm smiling through this. This terrifies me. So schools reflect society. Schools are at the forefront of demographic change. I've said this cultural anxiety issue. So what are some numbers? About 82% of administrators saying that they're seeing anti-immigrant hostility in their schools. 82%. That's very few that are seeing none. This sounds like, I don't know if folks followed issues around LGBTQ kids in school 20, 30 years ago. The numbers remind me of that if we're looking for patterns. This really upsets me, the next point, and I can show you survey after survey to prove this. The longer immigrant origin youth are in school, the less they feel like they belong. How are we messing that up so badly? Schools are supposed to be the place that integrate people into society, build belonging. So, and then in the meantime, I've said this, increasing numbers of other kids are becoming perpetrators of exclusion or bystanders to it, in which this is starting to become just normal. Now this happens in waves, but this cannot be normal. We need migration at this particular moment very, very badly. So in schools, immigrant kids in the US are treated through the lens of language. There's this idea that you're an English learner. That label turns out to be really bad for kids. When kids are labeled immigrant English learners, they think that that means that teachers don't think that they're very smart. And guess what? It turns out that their teachers in the same survey don't think they're very smart. And their peers don't think they're very smart. So we have a system that's designed to teach folks English, but the labeling and the segregation and the kind of education that they're receiving is reinforcing divides. So the money that schools receive for teaching about migration comes all through migration. Were you making your signal at me? Excellent, we're getting there. The money that they receive is all around language development, but not around these cultural issues, which I would argue are the heart of the problem. Language acquisition, I think, is a secondary piece to these larger questions of belonging, right? And you all know it's a gateway. Language becomes a vehicle, it's an opportunity, but we have a chasm to work on. So kids are not seeing themselves in their classrooms. As a matter of fact, schools that discourage, this is where language plays a really powerful role. Schools that discourage kids from speaking their home language it ends up kind of cascading for a lot of issues. Kids don't trust the teachers around them. They tend not to see themselves in what's being taught, not in the hallways, not in public events in the school. So the idea that, oh, this is an English-only school, or kids don't speak their home language, which we used to believe, we used to think this was a good idea, right? For folks who've been in language education for a while, this is what we used to think was good practice. It actually reflects something quite problematic. It reflects the idea that these kids feel invisible in the schools that they attend. So I feel a lot of times like I'm Sisyphus and I'm pushing the rock up the mountain. And so this is why I'm looking for friends here, because this work is not anybody's priority. I told you there's no marketplace for it. There are teachers who work with immigrants, but they're not trained to do that. There's all this mythology about immigration, and everybody could just work hard and pull themselves up by the bootstraps instead of actually talking about the realities of our own stories. We're told it's a hot button topic and you got to avoid it. This is really ridiculous. So I think about Albert Camus, who is famous for writing about the myth of Sisyphus, and he said, you got to imagine that Sisyphus was happy. So this is what I try to go through all day long, is I try to think he's happy pushing that rock up. So join me in this fantasy. So what we know matters a lot is relationships with teachers and informal mentors. You guys can make a difference tomorrow. Relationships between immigrants and peers counter xenophobia. Schools are where kids develop social networks. They did a ton of research on economics. They said the biggest thing to break down in economic inequity is kids with really diverse social networks. Schools are where those social networks are formed. Are we building an opportunity for kids to develop social networks? You know what contact theory is, right? Where you bring people together for sustained interaction? There are 513 studies that will tell you that contact theory works. When we bring people together with equal status and sustained opportunities, it breaks down prejudice and stereotype and changes attitudes long term. Why aren't we doing this more and more? I know some of you are. Students need to feel valued. Teaching about migration actually turns out to be one of the most effective ways to counter stereotypes, actually directly teaching it. But there's very, very little research on this. Most of the research I'm citing has been done in European schools. Most of the research doesn't exist in the US because this isn't the way we value this kind of education. Two things that really matter, I think you should probably know. A, if you want to predict that a kid's going to become verbally fluent in English, it's really helpful for them to have a friend whose native language is English, right? They will speak English faster, more fluently. And then everybody else does better in a class when immigrant kids are in a class. So this is a good thing too. Really good idea to segregate those kids out though, right? Nope. So this is what I want. I want young people across identities with a stronger sense of belonging in schools and communities in their countries. I want educators with an ability to promote habits of mind for a world of migration and demographic change. I want more equitable learning opportunities for immigrant kids. I want to increase civic empowerment among immigrant kids, who was a topic in one of the breakouts I just was in. I want a workforce that understands the importance and value of communicating and collaborating across differences. I want community members who recognize and can resist anti-immigrant prejudice. I want interconnected communities that promote feelings of belonging. So how the heck do we get there? So a few shifts. And I'm being bad because I really want to get to an exercise, but I think I need to get to the framework. So a few shifts. We need to shift from thinking about migration as some discrete event. and start to recognize that it is actually a human flow, one that we are all part of. All of us can tap into this. I want us to stop thinking about English learners or German learners or Polish learners or Czech learners, whatever. I want us to, because that's a small percentage of the population. I want us to think about the full experience. I want to think about immigrant origin kids, right? Because they're not just their language skills. You know, kids come with their parents' experiences. That's misdiagnosed. Their academic success is misdiagnosed when you look only through a language lens. And I want to think about how do you tap into all students in all these stories, because we're all implicated in the story of this global movement. I want us to stop talking about assimilation and start thinking about what does it mean to integrate, right? Integrate, by definition, is a two-way street. And it turns out the research is pretty good. People will integrate. People integrate pretty well unless policies prevent them from doing it. We're in a time in which policies are preventing us from doing this. So how do we move towards from assimilation and integration to a shared sense of belonging? We have had the opportunity to work with Harvard Graduate School of Education's Project Zero, and maybe some of you know the work of 𝘍𝘬𝙁 𝙭𝙀, who's done the work on global competence. I've known Veronica a little bit shorter time than I've known Larissa. So Veronica helped develop, actually she led the development of Reimagining Migration's framework. And the framework is basically asking you to consider 5 questions. Who are the young people we are educating? What are the most important perspectives and dispositions and competencies that young people need to learn in a world on the move? Number 2. Number 3, how should we teach about migration in a way that builds a shared understanding of how the world got to be the way that it is? 4, how can we create powerful learning environments that support all students? And that means their families too. And what does this mean for reimagining the education of educators? So for this conference, this is the question I want you to ponder. What are the most important dispositions that young people need to develop to thrive in a world on the move? A way to hold this in your head. How much time do I have? Excellent. I'm gonna skip ahead and I want us to try something. So this is where Adam believes in chaos. So what I'm going to ask you to do is there's an exercise we've played with that seems to be useful. And this is really stealing from Gordon Allport's work, where we try to bring people together. So I'm going to ask you to pair up with one person, and we're going to do the world's most abbreviated version of something that usually takes about 40 minutes, but I don't care. So what I want you to do is take this first question, and I want you to share, and then I want you to switch. And so the question I want you to ponder, and this may not be something easily accessible for you, you may have to think deeply, is that there's a story behind every experience of migration. What's yours or your family's? And now you're being like, what? We didn't just immigrate. You know what migration means? Anybody? Migration means to move. I just moved. How many of you have done that in the last year? Right? So there's all kinds of migration stories. You may have an immigration story. You may have one in your family, or you may have one of migrating from one job to another, right? So I want you to find somebody, and we're going to do the quickest version of this. I'm violating the time rule already. I want each person to go for 3.5 minutes, and then we're going to switch. And I know it's successful if we've made a lot of noise here. All right? Go find somebody. All right, switch up. Switch up. So just take one more minute. I'm so sorry. All right, so just finish up your thought. So I'm sorry to have done a tease, but I think the contact matters, especially after a couple days, right? It's a chance right before we go to the reception that you're going to have a chance to finish these conversations. I'll tell you, this is part of a larger project we've done in collaboration with 𝘍𝘀𝙁𝙁 Suarez-Orozco. 𝘍𝘀 is, she's the guru of working on immigrant kids as a psychologist. And so she's put together a really interesting question set, actually 3 of them, that we've used. One working with kids who are all immigrant kids, one working with kids who are second gen, and then one working with kids where it may be a much more mixed class. But we've been playing around with just this abbreviated version of it. And I'm just interested, how many of you have learned something just now? How many of you enjoyed that conversation? It's kind of amazing, right? We just, if we take the opportunity to listen to each other, right? So now we need to study and understand what the long-term impact of it is. But I can tell you that there's a lot of good feeling is what I've heard. You know, and so some people are uncomfortable sharing that story. So as educators, we have to be sensitive to the trauma that our kids may be carrying. On the other hand, one of the things that I've learned is oftentimes we'll try to protect kids. And a story that comes to mind is I was working with a young woman from Ecuador. She's crying in this exercise. And I said, maybe we should stop. She said, no, you're not going to stop me. She's crying. I'm like, I'm going to protect her. No. So kids want agency over their own stories. I also think this is a really powerful way to get people from communities that may not have thought of themselves as migrants involved in the conversation. Often people who are anti-immigrant feel that they've been told that they don't matter. I think their stories matter tremendously, and we need to put them in conversation with each other. So, look, here's work I'm asking you to do. Really, I'm not kidding. You've heard a little bit of this. There's a website full of a lot more material. I need you to start educating educators. I need you to start to share your insights. I need you to start to create exemplar interventions like the kind that you were talking about now, based on this kind of work, because we need to mainstream this. I need you to use your institutions to amplify some narrative change about the possibilities of education in this area and why it's important. I need you to develop systemic partnerships with museums and schools and cultural institutions to start to make these stories visible all over the place. And then I need you, I know I'm trying to do this, is to empower educators who are trying to take a bold step to do that. And that may be in your role as a university, and it may be your role as an adult in a community. But we hear a lot from folks who want conversations like this shut down. It's important we hear a lot from folks who think conversations like this are important to our future. So you hear that it's real. This is a sincere invitation. I'll give you my card, but you don't need it. This is work that y'all can do. We need bridging activities. We need to harness the curriculum to make sure there's a narrative change around these issues. We need to educate educators. We need these examples of interventions. We need these partnerships. But we really also need support for educational policies and practice that move us from a language-based thinking about this issue to really start to address some of the deep challenges that societies have when they're going through cultural and demographic transitions. Y'all have the power to do that, more than me. I'm just a foolish guy from Boston. But I want to end with a story. This is this teacher I really like. I happen to get to know a lot of good teachers in my work. This is a woman from Morristown, New Jersey. I was talking about accents. Catherine and I talk about her accent all the time. You would hear her and you would know she's from Central New Jersey the second she opens her voice. She's a lovely human being, and she loves her kids so much. So she decided she was going to do the project that we just did, and she was going to do it because her kids were isolated. So I'm going to read this, and it's going to be the last thing I'm going to say to y'all. So every block, so she decided she's going to do these interviews, and they're going to have one mainstream class pair up with the English learner class. And they're going to do the Moving Stories project, and they've been working in parallel. And so every block before the interviews, this is her words, it was, "Miss Tepedino, please don't make us do this. Why are you making us do this?" And it was a lot like, "It's normal to be nervous. I would never put you through something that would harm you in any way. There'll be teachers there supporting you." And we had translators supporting the students walking around. And I think it was just the anticipation that really scared them. And then once they got in there and they started talking, and they're like, "Oh, this is kind of interesting." And then after the interviews, the conversations continued, and it was so lovely. And I think they realized they had a lot more in common with these kids in the mainstream program than they thought. And they're making comments like, "We need so much more of this. We need to do this next year. We have such a diverse school, but we don't really interact very much with each other." So they're craving it. So when I saw my students interacting with the more mainstream students and they were saying, "Thank you, I made a new friend," it was just a beautiful thing for me. It was probably the most meaningful day of my teaching career, and my heart is exploding. It's not that hard. It's really just not that hard. We just need to do it. So when you're thinking intercultural exchange, yeah, think about other countries and think that the world is in our classrooms too. So thank you all so much. I get embarrassed when people clap after a talk because I really do think of myself as a teacher, and nobody applauds teachers. So we need to change that. We need to change that. Is there anything that y'all are wondering? Any questions? I feel like I've turned the challenge to you. I could bore you to death talking endlessly about the framework, but I think the questions actually speak for themselves. But you may not. So what's on your mind? Oh, good, I'm going to get a drink. Yeah.
Thank you so much for a very inspiring talk. And one of the slides toward the end of the presentation, the circle, it's all about, yes, the one.
This one? Which one?
No, this one.
Yes.
Educators. So we talk, the only one that goes outside of who is in this room, because I think we often preach to the choir, right? So we have to think about what we can do. How do we reach out to politicians, right? To other stakeholders that are really important, because all the different presentations that I've attended, including my own presentation, is very much kind of, resonates with what you've presented to us. But I know some of the discussions we had, we've been talking about how do we take this message to other important stakeholders in this country, in other countries, because we talk about global world, right? So what are your suggestions?
Yeah,
what can we do as educators?
Thank you. That is an awesome critique, and it's right. And it's true that I tailored my answer to this thought, thinking about y'all in your role as in the classroom. But let's think broader. One of the things we want to do is, I think we need to, in schools, let's start here. What are the institutions we already have built into our structures to start to speak to the general public? And we need to start to explain why this work is vital, right? Again, there is so much noise being made by people who would like to shut this conversation down. To me, this is not a political conversation. This is about humans. So I think this is something that we need to start and help people understand why we need to do this. We have institutions already there. I think we need to then start to be thinking about when school committees meet, who are we speaking to our local school committees? It's amazing how much power school committees have over what school budgets look like. So what do the training dollars and the professional development dollars look like? We need to get into the policy conversations. We need to make sure that there are people who are there. I would say there's another piece to this, which is beyond the school dollars, because I don't think the school dollars are really ever going to come. We need to talk to philanthropists. We need to make sure that the large foundations understand that this work is of value. Maybe some of you got grants to come here. There are people at foundations you all know. I think part of our job when we're grant recipients is to be in an honest conversation with some of the grant officers and say, hey, thank you for supporting my work. And I'd love for you to know about this other kind of work that we think is essential. And if you valued what I've done before, here's why. Philanthropy around migration in particular is almost entirely directed at policy change. Sadly, the US Congress, and I can only speak domestically on this issue, sadly, the US Congress is totally deadlocked. We're not going to change anything in the US Congress right now. Schools, we can change a young person's life tomorrow. I don't know if that's useful, but that's how I would start to be thinking. He's got a...
All right. Thank you so much for your presentation. Muchas gracias. I was thinking on Macedo. He's a scholar from the Global South. I think he's from Brazil. He talks about coloniality and decoloniality. And what you're talking about is definitely challenging the way we understand things as of right now. So thank you for that. I'm also an indigenous scholar, and to me, everything is about like finding all these bonds that, because of the way we do things, have become hidden. But aren't we all the same, right? And you're making me think that this project is like kind of overwhelming. So
sorry.
I know. No, but I have hope. At the same time, I do have hope. And we do need to have these conversations. There's a scholar from Bolivia. She's indigenous Huanca and Quechua. And she talks about like how in order to enact decoloniality, we need to like get out of the matrix, right? And we need to start like thinking differently and doing things differently. And I kind of want to ask you about that. I know you presented a framework already, but to what extent can we go to schools and high schools and universities and establish spaces where we talk about these topics?
So,
What would be like the first thing that you would do?
Well, so the first thing I do when I walk into a school is I talk about immigrant kids and belonging and help people understand that we're losing a generation. Because the law is the law. Everybody has the right to an education in this and everybody has the right to an equal education. Now, what that looks like is interpreted differently all over the place. But I think that most educators would like to do their job well. So I think that's why I usually make sure that people understand why the status quo is failing. So I didn't use this number. Do you know that 27% of the kids in the US public schools are immigrants or the children of immigrants? So we're losing over a quarter of our kids. That's absurd. So that's where I start the conversation with school people. In terms of starting the conversation with educators, I think it's so important to listen to people who understand their own community. I know this is educational jargon. Do you know what culturally responsive teaching is? You know, if we take the idea of culturally responsive teaching seriously, I should not be telling you what to do, right? You should be paying attention to your classroom, right? I can give you some material and a framework to think about those issues and some scholarship behind it. But my job is when you've adapted that work, I need to share it with you. Everybody around the country. So the New York Public Schools just created 3 units based on our work. My job is to make sure everybody in the country knows the New York City Public Schools just said, this is what we're investing in. So that's what, you know, I really think it's important because of the politics to start local. That's me.
I'm working here with an office that has to do a lot with undergraduate education. And nowadays, well, I shouldn't say nowadays, but the Board of Regents who oversee higher education in this state has mandated this educational experience for undergrads that revisits US history. And it does have like nationalistic tones, right? And we know that based on what you said, because I think it was pretty clear, that nationalism and this nationalistic thinking like kind of challenges this idea of like migration as human nature. And I already suggested this, and I know I am not the only one, but using frameworks such as the Sustainable Development Goals, and kind of utilizing like a local approach and also a comparative education kind of framework where we like sit down and say, okay, when it comes to gender equity and when it comes to environmental justice, this is what we've been doing good, this is what we have been doing bad, and then like providing the space for students to think. And to me, this is kind of the challenge. We need to start like making everybody, especially the young ones, responsible in a way, but not responsible that you have to work it out. Like, but you're gonna be the one who's gonna make that change.
I'm so with you, and I would love to talk strategy. I love thinking about how do you make sure that this turf is alive, even in communities that you may not think would be open to it. It's why we're doing great work in Omaha, Nebraska. I love getting my stereotypes broken. In Omaha, they're doing great stuff. And they're reading the book Frontera, which is about a whole school read. I can't name the school because I don't want them to get in trouble. But they're doing a whole school read about a story of an undocumented kid returning to the United States in Omaha, Nebraska. Who would think that that's possible? But they understand that that's what their community needs. I didn't tell them to do that. They understand that. So we need to think strategies. And if people want to go in through history, yes, I want to teach the US history on immigration. And it's on every standard. And I'm not an ideologue. Let's just look at how laws over citizenship have changed over time. We can have a good conversation there. All right, so I got to do this anyway. So the name you're going to leave with is, how many of you live in the U.S.? Just raise your hand. How many of you who live in the U.S. are second generation? Like your parents were immigrants. So do you know who 𝘍𝘚𝗧𝙁𝙗𝙗 is? Anyone? The reason you are citizens is because of 𝘍𝘚𝗧𝙁𝘗𝗧. 𝘍𝘍𝗧𝗏 was born in San Francisco in the 1870s, went to China, came back, they'd passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. They said, you can't come here, you're Chinese. He's like, but I was born in the United States. The 14th Amendment had got passed. He takes his case to the US Supreme Court and he wins his case, which means that anyone, regardless of where their parents are from, born in the soil of the US are US citizens. So why in the world, when we teach about citizenship, we don't teach about 𝘍𝘚𝗧𝙁𝘗𝗧? And then sneak your way in subversively to why stories of immigrants are so foundational to our nation's civic identity, right? That's something Americans could be proud of. It's subversive. I like subversive. That's what a good education is. All right, I'm talking too much.
So I've been doing some subversive work myself. And to go back to your idea, I live in a small town in Connecticut. I don't feel necessarily welcome there, but I've lived there for maybe 4 years now. And this year I said, you know what, I'm getting out there. So I contacted my local librarian and we started to put together some programs. So I do a Colombian dance night. I do, sometimes nobody shows up, but sometimes they do, and it's very interesting what happens.
Librarians are wonderful.
She's wonderful.
They're wonderful partners. Because librarians, more than everybody, they're dedicated to being culturally responsive. They want to know what books the kids in your communities want to read, because circulation is what matters. So again, who are your partners? Go find your allies, right? And if people want to talk about history, let's have a history conversation. If you want to talk about, inequity and immigrant kids, you just find your hook. You find your hook. I start talking dollars. It turns out that a lot of people who are undecided on these issues care about dollars.
She said dollars.
All right. You guys want to do other things. You have another life. But can I ask you this though, when you pair up, finish those conversations that I cut off, okay? All right, thank you so much.
All right, so on behalf of the Circle team, I'd like to say a few words. So this is the end of the paper portion of this conference, so it's just ended there, but tomorrow we have a workshop. And we want to say many thanks to those who attended this 9th ICC and share their insights. We hope that you had a wonderful learning and sharing experience and that you were able to make new connections. And we're looking forward to welcoming you again in spring 2026 for our 10th ICC. And its theme is intercultural competence in a rapidly changing world, supporting inclusive and sustainable futures. So please be on the lookout for our call for abstract. It's supposed to come out in fall 24 with a submission deadline of summer 25. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Kate Mackay here, Circle Associate Director, Marisol Aguirre, Circle's Outreach Coordinator, Yvonne Bourgeois, if she's still here, our Circle Tech Lead, Brady Larry and Amanda Lee, Circle Undergraduates Outreach Assistants, for the many hours that they've put in making this ICC a success. And I also want to thank our volunteers who chaired the sessions and made things run smoothly these past few days. Thank you so much. So I would like, before I pass on the mic to Kate, who has some housekeeping information for you, I say, let's enjoy the reception. Let's continue the conversation that was just started. And for those of you who are leaving tomorrow, safe travels.
Thank you, Beatrice. I just wanted to tell you, we sent you an email just now giving you information about how long the presentations are available, which is a little bit under 3 months. We sent you an evaluation form, which you can tell us about this conference and about what you want in 2026, if you're planning to join us at that point. You can also request a certificate of attendance, or if you presented, a certificate of presentation as well. We have QR codes for the evaluation form and the certificate here in my hand, but we'll take them down to the registration desk if you just want to scan that and then access those. If you have any questions, send them to circle@arizona.edu or respond to the email that we just sent. And then the only other thing is, well, 2 things. One is if you're going to the workshop tomorrow, registration was separate. It's not here, it's back at the Graduate Hotel. So go there tomorrow if you're attending that. And then the other thing to mention is that we have 𝘍𝗨 here. It's the musical duo over there. They played at this conference when we were at the Westwood Look about 6 or 8 years ago, and they do a lot of world music, and they sing in many languages, so if they don't sing in your language, ask them to do so, and they might. That's it. Thank you. Enjoy the reception.